Good afternoon. Welcome to everyone joining us today for our very special program, What's Making Us Laugh, the latest event in Bell's Creating New American Stories of Us series. I am Stephen Olikara, and I'm the president of Bridge Entertainment Labs. Bell is a pioneering effort to harness the power of entertainment and culture to transform the divisions in our country. To serve that mission, we are honored to work with storytellers and culture changers, from writers and producers to actors and studio executives. We also provide an important connection point to the very rapidly growing ecosystem of bridge builders and democracy reformers working to ensure our diverse democracy survives and thrives. And it's our job at Bell to reflect the best of those stories in the entertainment industry. I'd like to thank our entire Bell team, especially Ann Reedy, who's been the driving force making this all possible, as well as our partners, Civic Health Project and USC's Center for the Political Future, for their support since the beginning of our Creating New American Stories of Us series. And for those less familiar with the series, Creating New American Stories of Us is all about exploring how entertainment can help us flip the script on the narratives of division that are so pervasive in our country right now. The forces in American life that seek to divide us and profit from our outrage are strong. But we believe storytelling and entertainment are stronger. And it's Bell's mission to enlist the entertainment industry in crafting new stories of us. Today's event focuses on comedy. We'll be exploring the ways that comedy is showing up on screens, stages, and in communities across the country, sometimes serving to deepen our divides and further alienate Americans from one another, and sometimes doing just the opposite. There are enormous societal benefits to laughing together, and there's neuroscience behind this. Laughing swaps the cortisol in our bloodstreams with other chemicals in the brain: dopamine, oxytocin, and endorphins. Oxytocin is considered the empathy hormone and the bonding chemical. Endorphins trigger feelings of pleasure. In short, laughing feels good and helps us connect, and we're all hardwired to do it. Today is all about exploring ways to harness the incredible power of laughter to strengthen this ideologically diverse, multiracial democracy of ours. We believe that laughing together, even with people who may have very little in common with each other, is good for America, and will better equip us to successfully address the many challenges we face as a country. Finally, this is an event about comedy, and the good news for everyone here is I won't be doing a stand-up routine right now. I've learned to leave the comedy to the comedians, and that's why I'm excited that you will hear from a great lineup of speakers who are comedians, comedy writers, and producers of some of the most iconic shows of all time, and leaders at the intersection of comedy and civic health. So we invite our speakers and audience members to relax and have fun with this. And by the way, I love seeing all the activity in the chat. Please keep that going. We definitely want to hear from you. And one final note, we'll be sharing some brief clips throughout this program, and these clips offer perspectives on the power of comedy in our society. So before we launch into our first conversation, let's watch.
For me, the comedy is a way to build a relationship. Even a silly little joke. If two people are laughing, those two people agree with each other for a moment. And it bypasses the appropriate part of the brain sometimes. You're like, I shouldn't be laughing at this, but oh, you got me. And so there's a channel open between two folks in that moment of laughter. And so what are you going to slide into that channel?
For me, the funny part is the common humanity part. The part, I think we laugh together in the places where we thought it was just us. And then we laugh at the common humanity in just the nutty things that we do.
In the world of comedy, empathy is integral. Now, if we could see, like for example, if we would imagine comedy as a dish being created in a kitchen, empathy would be like the key ingredient to make that dish really come alive.
And look, I love that story. I think it reflects so well on my parents, but there's such a good question at the center of it. Very Jewish one, actually, which is like, to what do our empathies extend? Is it unconditional? Does it matter who they are? Does it matter how they feel about us? Does it matter why we're empathizing? Does it matter why we're empathizing with that? Because for a while, I was empathizing. In this room, these people feel powerless. They feel voiceless. Even if they are 1,000% wrong, those are universal struggles. It's hard to hate people up close. But once I realized I was empathizing, I was like, look at me. By the way, not just empathizing, connecting. Once I started talking, I was in the flow of conversation so effortlessly, I thought to myself, I'm gonna be a grand wizard in like 2 weeks at this rate. I'm getting my hood tonight, like it's happening.
And
Anthropologists think the first joke was one caveman seeing another caveman bump his head,
yeah,
because it's about empathy.
Yeah.
And I think comedy can be about empathy, because I think comedy is often laughing at the wrong thing because you know what the right thing is.
Okay, that's interesting.
And so you feel good. I get that.
Yeah,
I get that.
Yeah.
And it is undermining societal norms.
Yeah.
That's what's funny.
That's what's
funny.
funny.
That's what the surprise is. That's what the misdirection is.
Yeah.
So as we know, war dehumanizes people. I think comedy can help humanize people.
I'm not going to explain anything except to say that from Mark Twain to Will Rogers and Dick Gregory to Whoopi Goldberg, humor has been used to tell inconvenient truths in ways that unmask the arrogant and corrupt and enable us to see our own opportunities and responsibilities in a fresh light.
Historically, the role of comedy and satire has always been to like speak truth to power and like make fun of power.
See, humor is one of the few psychological mechanisms able to do that, to instantly transform strangers into people we feel safe around, people we can trust. And when we experience humor with somebody, this person begins to seem less strange and somehow more familiar. We also generally like people who seem similar to ourselves. But humor can do more than that. It can actually influence our motivations towards strangers, people we meet. And we can trace it on a very basic neurochemical level in our brains. Namely, genuine laughter releases this hormone, oxytocin. And it's a soothing hormone that gives way to feelings of affiliation and cooperation. So not only does humor make strangers appear less strange and more familiar, but it also makes us more willing to help them.
All right, well, let's jump into our first panel today, focused on comedy and its role in society. And we are very lucky to have two amazing speakers to join us today. First is Caty Borum. She leads the Center for Media and Social Impact, or CMSI, at American University. And I first met Caty a decade ago, maybe longer. And I've always known her as an incredible leader at the intersection of entertainment and impact, and very excited to hear more about CMSI's work more recently on comedy. Caty, it's so great to see you.
So great to see you, Stephen.
And we also have Dr. David Caplan, who is a writer and executive producer on The Conners. He's been a producer and writer of some of the most iconic shows in his career, including The Drew Carey Show and George Lopez. He also serves on Bell's Advisory Council. Such a rock star, both figuratively and literally, if you see the guitars behind him. Dave, it's great to see you.
Hey, Stephen, how are you? You got a haircut. It looks good.
I did. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, let's start with Dave. In addition to your role on some of these iconic comedic shows over the years in American life, you're also a social scientist and a PhD in media psychology. So I'd love for you to just help ground this conversation as we kick things off here. What makes us laugh, and how does that help to humanize Americans?
Okay, so I have like, what, a minute to describe what makes us laugh. Okay, let's do the best we can. Gosh, what makes us laugh is incredibly powerful because it's one of the rare moments that we'll give up our identity. So when you tell somebody, I'm going to change the way that you think about something, they immediately become defensive. Psychology, that's called reactance, counter-arguing. And there's only one or two circumstances in human existence where people will say, all right, I'll go for the ride. I'll let go of all the stuff that I believe for a second, and I'll go with you. And comedy is one of those instances. Getting sucked into a story is really the other one. But comedy initially announces itself as we're here to play. We're not here to threaten, and we're not here to work at changing your mind. We're here to play and connect things that haven't been connected before. And that's where the power really lies, because that means that you can think about something in a way that you haven't before. You can change your perspective because you're having fun doing it and it's not a threat. And then suddenly you've got a shift, a cognitive shift of perspective because you're allowing it to happen. And that's what makes comedy so incredibly powerful. And historically, we can talk about this in a bit, but historically, the power of comedy has been written about by pretty much every major philosopher, religious figure, and all the great thinkers basically have written about comedy, which is a terrific surprise. But that's how powerful it is.
Absolutely. And you talk about this cognitive shift, and Caty, I want to bring you in on this. First, just help to introduce CMSI and why you chose to get into the realm of comedy and its impact on American life.
Okay. And hi, Dave. We don't know each other yet, but I think that's crazy. We should totally know each other. So I'm also, Dave is not a professor, but he is an academic. So that's how I'm bringing us together, Dave Caplan, both academically trained to make things. So I run an organization called the Center for Media and Social Impact. But before that, for many years in Los Angeles, I was a producer and a philanthropy director for the lovely and great Norman Lear. And so I like to always say that I really come by, I always feel like it's important to say that I'm comedy people, because I sort of have this, I never want people to think that I just decided to study comedy and it came out of nowhere. It did not come out of nowhere. First of all, I'm a funny human. And Norman Lear, in addition to his incredible contribution to American culture, and Dave, I'm sure you were buddies with him, he was a really, really very funny, outrageously deviant person. And so he was fun to be in the office with because he was just fun all the time. And so I loved the idea of play coming in. So I'll tell a very brief story about my kind of more serious work in comedy. About 10 years ago, I started a rather large research agenda that has led to a lot of different programs that we run in the role of comedy in social change. And so what I really meant by that was, how is it that we are actually influenced, empirically speaking, from a social science perspective? How are we influenced? Oh, for those who don't know, Center for Media and Social Impact is based at American University in Washington, D.C., where I'm a professor, and I also run this innovation lab and research center. So I was frustrated, to be honest, as someone who's worked in media and social change my entire career, including the Norman years. I was really frustrated that I didn't think that the sort of, human rights writ large, those of us who care about equity and justice and think basic human dignity is something that should be a really basic, fundamental idea of American life and, of course, around the world. And I was frustrated that whenever it came to doing public engagement around things like environmental justice, climate justice, reproductive health, whatever, poverty, that it was dominated entirely by sort of serious thought papers. And of course we need those, right? Like I'm a researcher, I get it. serious thought papers. And the idea was like, if it's in the New York Times, everyone will know and will solve climate change or whatever, fill in the blank. And it's just not true about how humans work. It's just not true. Comedy from the very beginning was, we think that Aristotle was the first guy that defined it. I don't know how you prove or disprove that, but it's been written about a million times. So I also wrote about it. And what he really said at the very beginning was not just that comedy was a form of entertainment and play, but that comedy was actually existing as a societal corrective, that actually we need it almost as a governance strategy to be able to say and lampoon grotesque behavior that deserves to be lampooned. And so, yes, of course, it's also a form of play, but it's also a form of societal rebuke for us to say, this doesn't feel like a norm that we like. This feels unkind or whatever. And so in the research agenda that I started 10 years ago, which now has become many different comedy programs, including something called the Yes and Laughter Lab, something also called Good Laugh, a lot of different programs. And I wrote 2 books on this topic. I will hold up one of them because I'm just tacky that way. And here I am. It's called The Revolution Will Be Hilarious, Comedy for Civic Power. I messed that up. Social Change and Civic Power. Obviously, I haven't looked at it in a minute. But the point was, I wanted to ask and answer the question, what do we actually say across disciplines? Because Dave is right. Every discipline studies comedy. It's actually one of the most unusual ideas. Sociology, psychology, public health, medicine, the hard sciences, soft sciences, neuroscience, everyone studies comedy. What is it that we can agree on about what comedy actually does for us when we experience civic and social and public health issues through comedy? I really wanted to answer those questions and find real evidence for this because I really wanted, I wanted a sector of people who believe that we can make the world a little more kind and just. I wanted us to think of comedy seriously and not dismiss it as just something we watch on TV. So, I know you'll ask more questions later, Stephen, so I'll tell you a little bit more about what I've learned in my individual research over 10 years and what I've published in books and what we put out as a research center. But that's really the idea, to take the great power of comedy and not be afraid of it, and also to let comedians really play if we're going to invite them into making the world better. We can't sort of cut off their creativity.
Right. This is so fascinating because this idea of questioning norms through comedy, and you mentioned the idea of a governance strategy almost. And Dave, I know you're writing a book right now that touches on the intersection of comedy and democracy, its role. Any themes from that you want to share on this topic?
Well, sure. I mean, I look at comedy as being the canary in the coal mine of a working democracy, and of the free speech that we need to have public discourse, which is the thing that's really under fire in our country, is constructive, respectful public discourse. And comedy's got a huge role to play in that. Based on what Caty was saying, I'm reminded of a quote by George Carlin, who said, "It's the responsibility of the comedian to find where the line is and then step over it." And I really do believe that that's important. There was a term that I ran across, which I absolutely loved, which was evolutionary epistemology, which is the way in our country that we come to what we like to call truth, which is we have to have that discussion for it to tumble out eventually what the truth is. And sometimes that discussion takes 10 years or 5 years, and sometimes it takes hundreds of years. But that's how we do it here, and that's how it's always worked. And comedy's got a really important place in all of that, because comedy has to, let me just say very quickly, and Caty knows this, there have been like 3 great theories of why people laugh. And the first one really does go back to Plato, really Socrates and Plato. And it's called superiority theory, that at the basis of a laugh, you are making fun of somebody, something, or Hobbes was a big proponent of this. He called it a sudden glory of realizing that you're better than somebody. And that was the predominant theory of comedy for about 1,500 years, give or take. And then when you get into, you know, the 16, 17, 1800s, it gets replaced by something more or less called incongruity theory. And incongruity theory is about things that don't make sense on the face of them. And comically, we make a connection between two things that should be incongruous. That's vitally important because that's saying we're going to get out of our tribal partitions in society and we're going to reach across and connect things in a way that's non-threatening to get you to change your perspective, to shift your long-held cognitive beliefs because you're willing to do that because we've announced that it's not serious. And the importance of that, of getting to create discourse, conversation. That's what comedy does best, even when it's controversial. And that's the important thing. So anytime you try to chill comedy and say, well, that's too controversial, you're making the mistake of not having the discussion. When somebody says something that is offensive to somebody else, good, that starts the discussion. And that person then, as Caty was just saying, can be ridiculed or shamed as a corrective. That's the important part of it. It's not keeping them from saying it. It's letting them say it and have the discussion. And unfortunately, you know, we have a lot of, you know, examples over the last 5 years, 10 years, 50 years of trying to chill the conversation and not have the offensive comedic things said. And my argument is that's a mistake. We need the full marketplace of ideas, even ideas that need to be shouted down.
Can I
Right.
just add to that really quickly?
Absolutely.
So I feel like I love when people talk about incongruity theory. Very exciting. I always I say at the end because I like that one too, Dave. And I say for people to sort of like feel what that means in a joke structure. You set up the thing, you talk about the reality, you know, when you eat a pizza, whatever. I'm obviously not a comedian. And the incongruity comes when you bend the reality, and that's what actually gets the joke. And so just within that is a bit of frame shifting, lens shifting, where you can think, oh, I actually never thought of it that way. And this is actually, especially when you think about comedy that's dealing with social issues or civic issues, that, you know, these are issues that whether we like it or not are, you know, climate change, et cetera, are issues that can sometimes be very technocratic or very hard to understand. And, you know, for lay people, and we're all lay people unless we're scientists, and comedy can like kind of cut through and translate for you, but also do this lens shifting. But really the point I wanted to make after Dave was talking was to say, this piece about freedom of expression is so important. I cannot emphasize enough. I actually want to write a book about this, but I cannot figure out how to do it and actually keep comedians safe. Because when you actually look, the last chapter of my most recent book on this topic closes with a big story about comedians in Venezuela. And they're just an example of many groups of funny people who live in countries that have suppressed media, suppressed expression. If you actually look systematically, and those of you on this call do not have to, geeks like me do it, but if you actually look systematically, when a country starts to fall to authoritarianism, including the United States, when it starts to fall and the markers are there, journalists are in danger and exiled, and the very next, often at the same time, are the comedians. Now, I always say when I give my own talks about this subject, if that alone doesn't make you take comedy seriously in how persuasive and culturally potent and important comedy is in getting us to think about things, that alone should help all of us get it, because dictators understand it. There is nothing more terrifying or threatening than someone who is not scared, that someone who will make fun of you no matter what you are doing. So, you know, I'm sure so many people on this webinar know stories of Bassem Youssef and others, but that's really important. And I think we need to always be wary and aware of it in this country, because stifling freedom of expression is a very quick slippery slope. And we see it with comedy very easily.
That's such a great point, Caty, because I think there's this stifling of freedom of expression that's happening in comedy right now, which I think also relates to another line that I see in comedy, which is the line, the partisan line. Increasingly, I'm seeing comedy that fits into these kind of tribal partisan corners, which I think might limit the imagination of comedians to only serve one side as opposed to the other. And we only have a couple more minutes here, but maybe Dave, you can jump in a bit on that topic, on maybe the tendency right now to fuel our divisions through what I think some academics would call partisan in-group comedy, versus trying to open that up, and maybe the opportunity you see for opening that up.
Well, I think comedy is the tip of that spear. I think, let's talk about stand-ups for a second, because I'm really thinking about stand-ups, I'm thinking about television, I'm thinking about movies. Stand-ups, and I know a lot of them over the years, are the most rebellious, cantankerous people you'll meet, in such a great way that they don't care if they're preaching to the choir. That's too easy. There's no artist worth their salt that wants to just simply preach to the choir. Where's the challenge of getting people to think about something in a way that they're already thinking about it? Right? Comedy is built, as we've been talking, as Caty and I have been describing, to make connections between disparate things you haven't considered before. Maybe how similar you are. One of the great things in that Alex Edelman piece in his show, it's that great line where he says he's amongst the Nazis that he came to observe, and makes this odd connection to them, just to their humanity, and says, I came here to deride them, and I'm leaving as their youth outreach officer. Something's happened here. He makes a connection that is startling to him, but it's got an emotional truth to it. The problem is, we're living in a time where this is not being encouraged by the powers that be. When I started to make a list of TV shows that have been pulled out of syndication because somebody thought it was too edgy, too political, too whatever, it's an episode of The Office, of 30 Rock, of Scrubs, of Always Sunny, the Maude episode from back in the day. And I absolutely did love Norman Lear, by the way, Caty. It goes on. I think we saw what happened at the Oscars when Will Smith heard a joke he didn't like. Okay. If people are going to be afraid of comedy, if words are going to be violence, then it's okay to enact violence against anybody whose speech you don't like. That's a slope we cannot go down, right? We have to understand that the price of free comedy, of democracy that starts conversations that bring us together, the price of that is discomfort sometimes. And that's okay. Discomfort is the price of democracy. And sometimes I think we forget that. But comedy is the thing that starts the conversation, that makes the connections we're unwilling to make, that communicates the things we're too defensive to hear in other situations. And that's why it's the tip of the spear.
Well, thank you, David. We could not have scripted a better segue to our next panel, which will focus on stand-up comedy and will be moderated by Rob Feld, who has a film, Jesters and Fools, that speak to this exact issue, how we can create a true free marketplace of ideas around comedy. So we're going to wrap up this panel, but I just want to say a big thank you, Dave and Caty, for joining us today and sharing your expertise. This is the perfect way to kick off our session here today. So before I hand the virtual mic to Rob, I believe we have another clip.
Saying it's sad breaking up the United States, but we're already broken up. This would just be acknowledging it. We're already tribal. We're broken into tribes already. It's over. Liberal, conservative, white, black, Latino, Asian, Wall Street, Main Street, the working poor, the forgotten middle class, feminists, soccer moms, Bernie bros, dad bods, man tits, mom jeans, muffin tops, unibrows, paleo, cardio, keto, intersectional trans vegans. We're more tribal than 18th century Afghanistan. Submitted.
In a poll before the last election, 15% of Republicans and 20% of Democrats agreed that the country would be better off if large numbers of the opposing party just died.
We'd be better off if the other side just died? What? That's crazy. Please think about it. The entire country would be haunted by the ghosts of your enemies. And why can't you share a dorm room with someone you disagree with politically? It's a difference of opinion, not airborne chlamydia.
What these statistics are showing us is that we really don't know how to talk to each other. We don't know how to talk to each other, and when we meet someone with an opposing viewpoint, we're just so rigid and inflexible. It's like there's no room for disagreement, right? It's like we're all wearing hard pants, right? Ideological hard pants, and we're all muffin tops and anger, okay? But what we should be doing is wearing sweatpants. Now, I believe that sweatpants are the solution to the American ideological divide. These drawstringed hideous leg covers are the answer, because did you have too many liberal policies for lunch? Are you a little bloated from your vaccine virtue? No problem, just loosen that drawstring and let some other ideas in.
I was watching a White Pride rally. Don't ask why, it's just how I check in on my cousins. And I saw a man there with a sign that said, "Blacks and Native Americans were coming for you first." Disgusting, abhorrent, just awful. Also feels nice to be included.
And at some point I had a thought, which was so I had a thought that was so self-aggrandizing, it took me 2 years to tell anyone about it. But at some point I looked around the circle and I thought to myself, wow, look at me empathizing. Look at me feeling bad for these people when they're so horrible, but I'm such a good boy. Am I the hero that we need in these difficult and divided times?
And so, in this podcast, on this episode, and with every single episode that follows, I hope to get into those conversations. Let's chat about the things that make us uncomfortable. Let's chat to the people who make us uncomfortable. Let's come to consensus. Let's walk away still fighting, but understanding each other a little bit more. But most importantly, let's have the conversation.
It's nice to see everybody. As Stephen said, my name is Rob Feld. I was asked to moderate this conversation because I made a short documentary called Gestures and Fools, which featured the great Colin Quinn we saw a second ago and uses the observations of comedians to highlight the absurdity underlying America's state of polarization and the need for speech. You can see it at gesturesandfools.com, and I hope you do. I'd like to start with Blake. Are you there, Blake?
I'm here.
There you are.
Thanks for having me.
See you. So look, you've had a remarkably varied career. You're an Emmy-winning filmmaker, TV writer, creator of commercials and music videos, stand-up comic. Can you tell us a little about how you ended up in comedy?
Hey, dang, look at me. I did all that, huh? It was I've been a comedian since a very young age. I grew up in the hood, which I know coming out of my mouth sounds like a lie, but we used to it was either, for me, it was like most of my family was like affiliated in gangs or like in crime in some way. And I am a very nonviolent person. So the way that I would get by was by making other people laugh. So I had to start at a very young age as just a way to deal with my uncles who were crazy. So I just had to, it was that or join a gang, which I don't have the stamina for.
They're not very funny either, typically.
Gangs are real funny, actually. All of them, I mean, hilarious people, not nice, but they're funny.
Fair enough. Karen Foster, how are you?
I'm great.
You as well, multifaceted career. Can you tell us a bit about your journey into the world of comedy, how you ultimately led you to founding the organization you now lead, Inversity?
Absolutely. So I am a recovered journalist. That's what I thought I was going to be doing with my life. I was going to be this beacon of light and truth. I started at a local ABC affiliate, moved into network TV, got to work with Barbara Walters, and realized very quickly that if I wanted to be able to tell the truth and have any kind of creative control, it was not going to happen anytime soon, that route. So while I was at The View, actually, I found stand-up comedy, or rather it found me. And this light bulb went off. And I was always a fan, but I was never the class clown. I was the dork in Cool Kids Clothing, vice president of the Latin Club. But, did a little, popular, student council. So I was popular, but I didn't have a clique. And what I realized with stand-up comedy again was that my goal of wanting to bring people together could be achieved through laughter. And while I did not plan on having any kind of career in the diversity realm, that came after I was on air with Imus, Don Imus, after the famous Rutgers debacle that I've nicknamed Nappygate. I realized that, you know what, I'm going to have to do something about this. And this is my time to be this beacon of light and truth. And one of the ways I'm going to do it is through humor. And so inversity, as comics, we think differently, we see things differently. I was looking at the word diversity. The first three letters are DIV. What else starts with that? Oh, I don't know, divide, division, divorce. How's that working for us? And we expect diversity to make a change. So inversity is the term I coined, which is still the honoring of all that we are and we bring to the table, but the shifting of what separates and divides us to what we have in common, how we can be truly inclusive, but most importantly and powerfully, being introspective, understanding your value and worth so you can see it in someone else. And I use comedy as a major tool to help us get there.
Fair enough. So Pedro Silva, hi. You're a former pastor. You've described yourself once saying, I was a pretty conservative Christian for half of my life. You're now focusing on bridging divides, and you see comedy as a good tool to have in your toolkit. Is doing comedy as big a departure from being a preacher as it seems? Can you tell us a bit about what led you into the world of comedy? And if so, if at all, do you see these two roles are relating to each other?
Yeah, they kind of connected with each other. The first time I ever preached, one of the parishioners said to me afterwards, if you're going to make me this depressed, you should at least tell me a couple of jokes first. And so that's kind of how I started saying a little bit of jokes. And then the foray into stand-up comedy started at a homeless memorial. I was doing a homeless memorial for about 45 people, but it got interrupted by some liberal protesters who were protesting the mayor during the homeless memorial. And I was stuck between the protesters and the homeless people who were yelling at the protesters. And a stand-up comedian was there watching the whole thing. And afterwards he said, hey man, you handled that pretty well. Why don't you come do some stand-up comedy with me? And so that's how I ended up in stand-up. One thing else I could say, I saw a article when I was I'm pretty maxed out at being a preacher, and I saw the headline was why Dave Chappelle is the pastor the world needs. And I was like, what? He's the pastor the world needs. So I decided to, kind of dip my toe into the comedy waters. And I was lucky enough that Mark Gerzon, who leads up the Mediators Foundation that's connected to Bell and everything, he was at my first set. And I called the first set Liberation Comedy. And so he was like, hey, is that a real thing? It should be a real thing. And he kept calling me until it became a real thing. And so that's how I landed up here.
I want to ask Blake if you've ever had a comedy performance go hilariously wrong, because that happens. Can you tell us about that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that if you haven't had bad performances, you're not doing it enough and you're probably doing it wrong. But okay, so the worst one was relatively recently, like within the last year. I got asked to do a stand-up show for this politician. I won't say their name. They're running for an office. And they had made this whole lineup, and I had noticed that all the comedians were gay except for me. And I was like, fine, whatever. Like, I'm an ally. I'll show up. I'll do the thing. They, first mistake, thought I was gay. So everybody was mad then. They didn't like that. And then, it's my job to read the room, which I didn't. And I got on stage, and the first thing I said was, I'm an enrolled member of the Chickasaw Nation, but tonight I'm wearing the traditional regalia of the Fuckboy Nation, and proceeded to bomb for 15 minutes. In my defense, they had rented out like a 200-seat theater. About 40 people showed up, so I don't think that person's getting elected. So not my fault. But it was pretty brutal. I've never bombed that. I've never like usually I can get them back in some way or another, make them laugh, and they didn't. They wanted none of it. They like one person said "ha," just "ha," which like just shut up. Don't even talk at that point. And I instead of like backing down, I just went ahead and did it. I just went ahead and did my material. Didn't deviate. Should have, but and then got off with my head hung low and went and shook everybody's hand and dipped out quick.
Well, you put it out there. That's your job. Karen, Karen, talk to me about how would you say that that adversity relates to other DEIB efforts?
Well, it doesn't actually. It's definitely it's a change in a new direction. Other DEI efforts, while I think people's hearts are in the right place, their minds aren't. Because there is no way in hell that for decades of telling people to do something, we keep going 2 steps forward, 10 steps backward. True inclusion means that diversity isn't just, it doesn't have parameters, right? Which it does right now. You're only considered diverse if you meet certain qualifications. That's the antithesis of diversity. You're never going to get to inclusion that way. You're going to have somebody that's going to be an outlier. And so again, you know, we have to reframe this conversation. I think that people are coming around. I know that people certainly appreciate my approach. I certainly, I'm not ever going to slam anyone who's dedicated their lives to making the world a better place through DEI. I just think we need to look at what is not working, what hasn't been working for a while, what's adding fuel to the fire, which I think is why we have such backlash against diversity right now and diversity efforts, because it's, you know, it's almost been overcorrected, if you will. And so we need to kind of come back to common sense, which I think is what comedy does a great job at doing. Comedy creates a neutral space because diversity is such a personal conversation and topic that so many people are coming either on the offense or on the defense. And so humor creates this neutral platform for us to have these really challenging conversations and for us to connect and to realize, yeah, we do have more in common than we don't. And it creates that space for the ahas and the epiphanies and the vulnerability that comedians have that no other artist has. And I think bringing that to the table allows other people to be vulnerable in this conversation around diversity as well.
Pedro, you mentioned liberation comedy. Can you tell us a bit more about what that is, what the vision for it is, and what it does?
Yeah, I mean, the idea behind liberation comedy is really just trying to break us out of these like boxes that we put ourselves into and being able to both witness the box as sometimes useful, but not always useful. And a lot of us, we identify ourselves with the boxes that we're in. And so I try to make people laugh at themselves, but a lot of times I laugh at myself. I take a lot of my own personal experiences that are sometimes painful if they're not processed and show how you can laugh at something if you allow it to process, if you allow yourself to go through the grief and to just be fully human, fully engaged. Like I actually know Blake and Carol, so it's hard for me not to like laugh or want to interrupt them when they're talking. But we've had conversations about like Blake and I talking about like growing up and people saying, "What are you, some kind of Mexican?" Because we grew up in places where there was only black, white, and if you weren't white or black, then you were just Mexican. And because of my name, they would just say some kind of Mexican. And so we would laugh about that and laugh about being ostracized and things like that. And we were at an event one time and we were just laughing at so many things that other people would be crying about. But we processed it. And so other people looking at us like, what in the world? Like, what are they laughing at? He was laughing at his cousin getting murdered, or And I was laughing.
Uh-huh.
I was laughing about my mom like not giving a crap that I made honor roll and saying whoop-de-doo. But it was things that other people. I mean, there's a lot of things in our lives that are painful, but we need to be liberated from those things. And laughter, when you see people laughing and stuff like that, it shows that they processed it to some degree. And when you're able to laugh at yourself, you're also giving people permission to laugh at themselves and realize that some of the things that they try to pitch their tent on or whatever, it's not worth it. It's not the fullness of who they are. And last thing I'll say about it is, like, when I was a pastor, we used to get taught to preach from your scars, not from your wounds. And so that means like something has healed over. But I think that comedians are in a unique position of being able to preach or speak from their scars and their wounds while it's still in the process of healing, and inviting other people to go through that process as well. So, yeah.
Oh, I love that idea. Rolling off of that, Blake, you touched a bit on this. You're an enrolled member of the Chickasaw Nation of Oklahoma, and talk about how you grew up in Oklahoma City. So can you tell me a bit more about what role, if any, that personal background plays in your comedy?
Oh yeah. Thanks for reminding me I was poor. It was
any day.
Yeah, thank you. No, I want to Pedra's right. We were laughing about me. I actually caused the cousin death on an accident, but I didn't find out until like 15 years later. So can't be prosecuted for it, which is nice. I didn't do anything. I just set a booby trap, and it caused a conflict between two cousins. Not my fault. Not my fault. Oh, and I also, Pedro is also correct. I spent the first 10 years of my life basically identifying as a cholo. I like dressed that way. I was in like a Latin dance. I did all of it. And then I was like, oh, okay, I don't have to be this anymore. I can just, but you're right. I was basically Mexican, kind of.
Some kind of.
But yeah, kind of a little bit. Yeah. But my, like, being indigenous, growing up poor, it just informs all the stories that I tell. It informs everything, because the perspective that I have on life is much different than most people, because most people haven't lived that. And like, for me, that's a bridge building opportunity, because a lot, like, the one thing that frustrates me so much is when people see poor people, their immediate reaction is like, oh, how terrible it must be. You must be sad all the time. And it's like, we're not. We're laughing. We're having, like, if we were sad all the time, like, we wouldn't be able to survive at all. Like, there would be no reason to like continue and like persist, because there's nothing there. But like, the way people come at us, like donors and that sort of stuff, or like people who want to, like, there's always the missionaries who come in, whether that be religious or like they're, the private school down the road that's coming to help the kids at Mark Twain Elementary because none of them can read, but it's named after an author. Like, those are the, like, but they never come with humor. They never come with laughter. They won't laugh with you either, because you're like, they think that if they do, it's offensive. It's like, no, we are funny. And like, listen, I'm a former poor. I got this nice box now. This thing's expensive. But I still, like, that's still part of my community. That's still my people. Like, a lot of my family's still poor. So like, I just think for me, like, my comedy just, I don't know. I don't want to say uplifts those people, because they're not getting any money off of it. I am. So like, but like, I do think that, like, it humanizes. That's a better word. It humanizes them, because other people look at them as like a case of like, oh, woe is me, and then they like dip their toe in, or like they'll have like a big event to help the homeless at like some fancy house, and like not think about the fact that nobody from that community is in that room. So like, for me, it's just about that. It's about, I use that as a way to like humanize, and just, you can only talk about your experience. So that's what I do.
Yeah, I do. I have heard, a good deal of people saying how so many of the sensitivities are coming really from outsiders who are, think that they're helping and defending, but are actually, not really speaking for anybody, and humor gets lost in there.
Exactly.
Kareth, yeah. So to that point, Kareth, can you talk about what's the funniest misunderstanding you've ever had with an audience member?
Well, I wouldn't even say misunderstanding. Well, okay. It's actually my bombing story, like the biggest bombing experience I ever had. I was shooting Jamie Foxx's Laugh-A-Palooza at the Earthlink Center, no, the American Airlines Center in Atlanta. Now, there are two Atlantas, right? There's like the bougie, Spelman, upper class, like my family side Atlanta. And then there's like the Pootie Tang Atlanta. And that's who was in the audience that night. And so I get on stage with me, my hair, this voice, which sounds like a white girl from the suburbs of Texas, because that's where I grew up. And I had a very similar experience to Blake. The audience stared at me like thousands of eyes, 4,000 people. It was a TV show taping, thousands of eyeballs on me. And I think I got 3 laughs. I was supposed to do 10 minutes. They gave me the light at, I'm pretty sure 4. I like, and the thing is, it would have been better if they'd heckled. I thought that, this is supposed to be my people, right? Like I'm Black, they're Black. Like, what's the misunderstanding? I'm just, another like not even another kind. This is me. This is who I am. What's the problem? And I think if I could have spontaneously combusted on stage, they would have been happier. And I get off stage and I'm devastated, just devastated. I feel completely rejected by an entire ethnic group that I'm supposed to be belonging to. And I go backstage and I'm sobbing, that 4-year-old cry when you're like, like you can't even regulate yourself. And my cousins had been in the audience, and the girl who was kind of taking care of me, she's like, somebody's at the door, they want to see you. I'm like, no, I can't see anyone. And she goes, you really need to. So I'm thinking it's my family. My family had left. It was these 4 gay guys, 2 Black guys, 2 white guys. And they were like, you were fabulous. And that's the only thing I think that kept me from unaliving myself that night, because it was that bad. It was that bad. And so as far as like a misunderstanding, I think that's probably the greatest one, like misunderstanding that I was there being my authentic self, and the audience, they wanted something else. And yes, there's about reading the room, of course, knowing your audience, but I was hoping that crowd was a little more evolved than, because I'd survived Showtime at the Apollo. Like I lived to tell that. I thought I could do anything. I was, platinum, So yeah, that's probably the greatest misunderstanding.
Fair enough. Pedro, can you talk about social cohesion, what it means, or what does it not mean to you? How can comedy help to foster it? And what do you see as a recipe for comedy that humanizes across divides?
Yeah. I think this moment is social cohesion. I mean, to some degree, like I'm laughing at Blake and Kara's pain, but they're laughing as well, and that's a part of being human. And I know these stories because they've both been on my podcast. And one of the questions is, what is the worst experience you had? So I already knew it was coming. So that's sorry for laughing. In terms of,
Okay.
The broader sense of social cohesion is, I think that people being able to, I personally assume social cohesion. I come from a paradigm where when people say there's 2 sides to each coin, I say there's not 2 sides to each coin, there's one coin, and our divided mind is separating that which cannot be separated. So I assume social cohesion in every way, and I try to listen through what people are saying, even when they're saying things that may be offensive. Like, for example, I was at a party a few months back, and it's in Boulder, so it was mostly white people. And I was sitting on a chair, and they were serving fried chicken, and they didn't do it just for me, but they had fried chicken here, right? And I'm saying this because this was part of the joke. This guy was walking past, and he almost dumped a tray of fried chicken on me. And then when it almost fell on me, they caught it. And then this other guy saw it happen, and he goes, "Oh, he died doing what he loved, drowned in a tray of fried chicken." And then, and then after he said it, I looked at him, and I was about to start busting out laughing. And he looked at me like, "Oh my God, I just said a Black guy's gonna drown in a plate of fried chicken." And the guy left the party and never came back. And I feel like if we could assume social cohesion, I could have joked with him about it. I could have laughed with him about it. We could have gotten into different spaces with it. But in this society, we can't go there. And I have a theory. I kind of want to use this theory for myself, so I might not share it with y'all.
Don't be selfish.
Yeah, no, I might be able to. But I have a theory that the reason why our comedy is so constipated right now is because there are some people are experiencing themselves as losing liberties, and their liberties are sometimes to hold other people back, and they take it as being as themselves being oppressed. And so they're like, well, if I can't have fun, then nobody can. And then you find these people that are all trying to uh, keep the liberty, the liberation, the comedy, the laughing, the getting more, the knowing more about each other, so we can laugh and pick at each other. Like when you get with people, even when they're across differences, if you become friends, you can say things to each other that nobody else can say. And like, what would it be like if everybody was able to look at those things and laugh at those things and joke those things and expand their consciousness, expand their awareness, expand their ways of being together, build capacity. But right now we're afraid of doing that because everyone's afraid. I had a group of people that I was supporting and helping, and and talking about some beautiful vision of everyone working together in harmony. And I was gonna have Blake come out. It was some indigenous people too. And I was gonna have Blake come out. And we're gonna do a comedy thing. And Blake was like, "Yeah, I'm down for it." Within 2 days, they were mad at me because I said the word perceived. They didn't like the word perceived. And I
Well,
was like, "Come on."
you cannot
So
win, I guess, but I think you
yeah.
can. But on that, I'd like to thank everybody. I need to pass the virtual mic back to Bell President Stephen Olikara for a one-on-one chat with celebrated TV writer Rob Long. Before that, though, we have a 1-minute pop-up quiz for you. So good luck.
All right, that was a great panel. Pedro, I think you're still on. I have a party coming up in Boulder, Colorado later this month, so that story is definitely going to be top of mind for me. But big thanks to Rob for moderating that entire conversation. And now I'm very excited to introduce Rob, but I also just want to show, okay, we got the results to the comedy quiz here. Let's see how people did. All right, Nate Bargatze on the first one, 48%. Cheers. Okay, a lot of people got cheers for the second question, 51%. 70% got vengeance on question 3. And then 84% got blackish in question 4. I shared these questions with my partner Stephanie last night I didn't even feed her these options for the answers, and she got 4 out of 4. So either she knows a lot of pop culture, or these questions weren't hard enough. But it seems like everyone here pretty much got things right. All right, now we can bring on Rob onto the screen.
Hey there.
There he is, Rob. All right. Well, just by way of a brief introduction here, Rob is a writer and producer of many shows, including one of the most iconic shows ever, Cheers, which received 2 Emmy Awards and 2 Golden Globe Awards during his time on the show. He's also a political and social commentator, podcaster, among many things, a Renaissance man. And in addition to that, Rob serves on our Bell Advisory Council. Rob, great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here. I'm glad that people recognize that joke from Cheers. That was good. It was before my time,
Exactly.
but still, legacy pride.
Exactly. Well, that actually sets up the first question I wanted to ask you, which is, out of your entire career of writing jokes on television, is there one joke that stands out to you as the best, or if you feel comfortable, more interestingly, the worst, the least funny joke that you've put out on TV?
Well, the least funny jokes, when you write television comedy, you just cut those out. And you just, when the live audience on a show doesn't laugh, you disappear it. It's like we're all little mini Stalins. It's like it never happened. And you just always shoot these shows long so you can cut out the jokes that don't work. The funny ones, I'll tell you honestly, I should say I should have my Writers Guild card revoked for this. But the funniest moments on not just the shows I've worked on, but I think of the shows that I've really enjoyed, have come from that weird combination of acting and dialogue. Like if you go to a table reading of a great comedy show, I think every writer has had this experience, and you read the script, the first version of it, before it's been rehearsed and rewritten and all that, it makes complete sense on page. But as you go through the week, you find different moments and the actors add stuff. And so sometimes the best moments are the things that the writers and the actors found together. So I have a hard time pinpointing a joke, but every now and then will come to me. But mostly what I think of, which I think a lot of writers think of, is like the jokes we did were like, well, you can't do that anymore. Or, well, you couldn't do that joke anymore. So that's kind of what we remember now. Pretty much anybody who writes comedy, when they hang out together, they're at least 2/3 of the conversation is all the stuff you can't do.
Right. And just to set the scene a little bit for our conversation here, we're going to talk about comedy on TV. And you've seen, Rob, how the topics on comedy have changed over the years. What's the biggest thing that you've seen change in terms of the topics that people want to hear about, that you're allowed to write into TV shows? What's the biggest change you've seen over the last, let's say, 30 years or so?
Well, I think a couple things. One, I think has been just recently, in the past 10, 15 years, the disappearance of an audience show, what we used to call multicam comedy. That was sort of introduced or reintroduced in the early 70s, because in the 60s, all the comedies were what we now call single camera comedies, and they seemed old fashioned. And so they want to make it sound more immediate. So if you can believe it, there was a time when that 4-camera multicam comedy was groundbreaking and edgy, and it's where you had people talking about real things in life. So that's one thing I think it's gone. I think it's too bad. The other thing I think is gone is the idea that that it's okay to make a joke. The danger with comedy is, and again, like people talk about it. I know people, it's like old E.B. White quote, which is that humor, like a frog, can be dissected, but like the frog, it tends to die in the process, right? So you got to be careful when you start, try to open up the hood on something that's funny. But the best thing about it is it's spontaneous and it's absolutely involuntary. You either laugh or you don't, which means that when you laugh at something, you can't pretend you didn't think it was funny because you laughed. You gave yourself away. And so that's part of why an audience together, laughing together, feels so great. It's because we've all given ourselves away in a way that we didn't expect and we couldn't control. And so there's been this movement, I think, and sometimes you can hear it from very, very well-meaning people, to think of comedy as a tool. Comedy is a thing. We're going to help teach people about X, Y, or Z. Or we're going to help them understand my perspective on X, Y, or Z. And man, that's just a killer. That is a killer. That just kills the humor right there. You drag it out to the center of the courtyard. You put a bullet in its head when you've used it as a tool to do something. I've noticed that sometimes when people talk about we're divisive, I don't think that we're not divided as people. I think we are. I think we're not nearly as divided as we say we are. But we use that term, and sometimes we really definitely mean we have serious divisions. But a lot of times what we mean is, by divided, we mean there are just too many people who don't agree with me. And the solution would be if they did agree with me, because then we wouldn't be divided, because we'd all agree with me. And that's the kind of thing it's going to be really hard to do. Comedy is not about convincing people that you're right. It's about convincing people that we're not different. And that's a slightly different thing.
Right. Well, when you think about political divisiveness as it relates to comedy, one trend that I've noticed, and you see this on late night TV, and I think you've been a frequent guest on the Greg Gutfeld show, which is sort of the late night show on Fox News for the political right. And you see how Jimmy Kimmel and Stephen Colbert have gone more political, and also deciding that I have a tribe that is Democrats and that anti-Trump humor will be very profitable. In fact, I think Colbert almost lost his show, and it was Trump getting elected and him doing anti-Trump jokes that kind of kept him on the air. What's your take on that? I mean, is it good that people have their spaces to kind of congregate in similar political and comedic silos, or do you think that's a bad trend? And just curious your perspective on that.
Well, if you're going for, if all you need to be a hit is about 1.5 million or 2 million people, which is not that many, right? I mean, really, it's nothing. But it's a big hit now on TV, late night TV especially. If that's all you need, then it probably makes financial sense, for you to just, preach to the choir, do what we call, it's not comedy really, it's fan service. It's like I turn on the show, they're going to make jokes about whoever my villain is, whether it's Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden or, Ted Cruz, doesn't matter, right? And you can cobble together your 1.5 million, 2 million viewers, you can call it a day, and I guess that's fine. It's no fun. And it makes the comedy lazy. And so you watch some of these shows and you think, oh, come on. And I think the second thing it does is it drives the audience away. If you want to, I really believe this. If you want to find funny, edgy, interesting, thoughtful, but a little bit offensive in a good way comedy, you can find that now on TikTok or Instagram. And these are young people making great jokes. And they are saying things you are not allowed to say if you are only going for a certain audience. And that's just pure economics. People like to laugh. They like to be surprised. And if you continually feed them what they say they want, they're going to end up turning you off. And that is what's happening. And certainly it's been happening in broadcast TV. It's definitely happening in streaming TV. It's what they call self-own. You don't have to do it. The cliche is in show business now is that there aren't, everybody watched Johnny Carson, everybody watched Leno and Letterman, those people. The cliche is that there aren't those audiences anymore. I don't know if that's true. I do know that no one's trying to get them anymore. So now maybe they aren't there. I don't know. But there's nobody out there swinging for the fence and saying, everything in life is not about politics. Everything in life is not about the presidential campaign. Everything in life is about that you and I disagree on, I don't know, income, capital gains tax or school choice or whatever. That person, that network, that executive, that producer, that writer, that comedian who figures that out is going to have the field all to himself.
Right. Well, I think there's one business model, as you mentioned, about, you have your political tribe and you speak to that roughly 1 million people every night. But another take on this that I've heard is that, comedy that speaks to the core human condition is another way that could attract a larger audience. Now, I would argue, I'd be curious if you agree with this, Rob, that the Cheers bar is something that kind of embodies that sort of ethic, the idea that we're just speaking to just human issues. It doesn't matter what background or you come from or who you voted for, speaking to that core human condition. Do you think that style of comedy is lost? Does it need to come back? How does that land with you?
Well, I think we have to decide that our goal is to entertain, and that the way to entertain is to tell the truth, and that the truth isn't perfect, and the truth has people in it who are dumb and who are bigoted or who are do-gooders or who are irritating in some way, that we still love them. The Cheers bar is a good example of it, because those people today would not be in a bar together because they'd be too offended by each other. They would already know, what news channel would they watch on TV? And we tend to think that everyone's making these choices all the time, and maybe they are. But I suspect that part of the problem, at the bedrock for what happened to comedy, is that we decided early on, or recently, we decided that we were going to use it to convince people to change their mind and agree with me, rather than what we really should be doing is trying to make you laugh. Because I can make you laugh, I've done a bunch of different things that are probably socially good, right? That's what Cheers did. That's what the great comedies did. But in terms of persuading people, it's a cliche. We say, oh, it's good to persuade people. But remember, the generation that grew up watching the sort of anodyne, soft family comedies of the 1950s, Leave It to Beaver generation, that generation grew up to riot in the streets in the 60s. And the generation that grew up watching those great Norman Lear comedies, which are basically, in many ways, left-wing agitprop, right? They grew up to vote for Reagan in the 80s. So we have to be really careful about how we talk about how we're going to convince people of this. Maybe the job is just to represent the way life really is. The greatness of those Norman Lear comedies wasn't that they espoused a political view, but they he depicted what was happening in living rooms and dining rooms around America at a time when the American culture was changing. And that's what made them great.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, that the people in the Cheers bar wouldn't even be in the same bar anymore. And,
yeah,
Rob, you've wrote about and observed the changes in the industry, the changes in our culture. And do you think that those structural changes are compatible with a style of comedy that can humanize, that can create empathy across Americans? And I agree with what you're saying, that just comedy that entertains should be the baseline. But structurally speaking, is that possible to create more comedy that empathizes, that humanizes?
Well, see, I'm not sure. I don't think there's a category, large general category C comedy, capital C comedy. I think it's just individual people's stories. And the more specific you are, usually, this is the great paradox of comedy and I think drama too. The more specific you are, the more relatable it is. So we decided that everybody represents a certain, identity bucket, right? And we sort of, it was giant spreadsheet if you're deciding what you're going to buy or what you're going to produce on your network, and you're checking boxes. But the truth is that a person can relate really powerfully to a family that has a different race or different ethnicity than they are, because the specifics of it, ironically, seem much more relatable and much more true to me, right? So I'm not sure that there's I think the first thing we have to be is as cultural sort of gatekeepers is we can't be afraid of laughter. And I think we're afraid of it, both as an audience and as comedy producers, because what if you laugh at something that's not okay? And here's a perfect example. There was a great, this is before my time, but there's a great scene in Cheers. It was one of the early episodes. I forget which one it was. Sam and Diane, that's the love. I'm so old now, you have to explain to people that they're young, right? It was a classic romantic comedy, two couple, a man and a woman. They were madly in love. The only problem was they were terrible for each other. It was like the worst relationship ever, but they couldn't break free the way these things sometimes are. They had an enormous amount of sexual chemistry, romantic chemistry, but the audience was like, we want you to get together, but you shouldn't be. They're having an argument. Sam says something to Diane. Diane slaps him in the face. And Sam slaps her back in the face. And then she slaps Sam back in the face, and he slaps her in the face. And I think they do it 3 or 4 times. Audience is erupting with laughter. And I think this is the scene where there's a pause. And he says to her, "Are you as turned on as I am right now?" And she says, "Hell yes," or much more, or something like that. Giant audience goes nuts. It's a great scene. I don't have to tell you the problem with that scene. I don't have to tell you that scene would never, ever be written, rehearsed, performed, filmed, shown to an audience. And I think that is a problem, because the specifics of that moment were great and it was funny. And once you start turning on your brain and saying, yes, but what will people think? Or what are we trying to say? Instead of what story we trying to tell? I think you're going down a road where kind of where we are now, where everybody's afraid to laugh.
Yeah.
And that's not a great place to be.
Right. Agreed. Well, I wish we could talk more about Cheers, but we do have to transition things to the next panel. So Rob, thank you so much. Truly an honor to have you joining us here today. And next, we're going to hear about a really interesting way that Minnesota is using comedy. But before we do that, let's hear from a couple more comedians in this next clip.
I think laughter eases tension. If you can laugh about it, we may not be on the same team. I got a room full of Democrats and a room full of Republicans. And I cracked the right joke. And the Republicans laughed and the Democrats laughed. What we did was we took that divide and we eliminated it. And now we're all laughing collectively. Because we found the commonality. Even if we disagree, we both agree on the point of view and what was funny about it, right? A bunch of black people, a bunch of white people. I find the right joke. I don't care if it's about black people. Everybody's laughing, including the black people and the white people. I found the right joke. I just write white joke. White people are laughing, black people are laughing. Now I talked about race, and I brought everybody together with a laugh. And I think we were able to do that with society, right?
I'll say this, both sides, one thing that both sides can agree on, I've found, is that each side thinks the other person hates America. That's pretty down the line. Every single person, I'll tell Republican, I'll tell you what, every single Democrat wants to take your baby and put a chip in them and sell them to China and give you an injection in your arm that makes Rachel Maddow tolerable. What? You've seen the haircut. Explain it. And then Democrats, of course, are just like, if you don't believe 100% of the things I believe, you are stupid, 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 stupid. 99.9% of things, that's what you agree? Fuck you, Hitler! You know? It's insane. We've got to stop the insanity. I miss when the country being divided meant you didn't know who you wanted to win the home run race. Mark McGuire or Sammy Sosa. You know what I mean?
Gosh, this has just been such a joy today in a time when democracy work can feel like really serious work. And today's just been such a good reminder that we can take things seriously without being too serious. My name is Libby Steger. I'm the founder and executive director of Move for America. We're a nonprofit dedicated to catalyzing a generation of leaders to bridge divides and strengthen civic dialogue. Our programs are not as funny as the ones we'll talk about today, but our programs do equip teens and young adults with the skills to engage civically and to make change in their communities by bringing people together rather than driving them apart. But surely this event today already has inspired me to add some more comedy training to our program. So I'll be calling some of the folks in this room so we can weave that in. One of the other reasons I'm here today is because I'm a Minnesotan, and it is such an honor to be here today with fellow Minnesotans who are leading the way in bringing people together through the truly immense power of narrative and comedy. We have Kevin, Tane, Brandon, and Trig. Welcome. And my first question is for Tane, Brandon, and Trig. You all are creators of an innovative program that just launched called Sketches of Minnesota. And it's been described as a comedy-inspired civic comedy, a community-inspired civic comedy improv tour that uses laughter and comedy to celebrate Minnesota communities, promote dialogue, bridge divides, and help find ways to work constructively across differences, particularly in today's political environment. Easy. So tell us a little bit about Sketches of Minnesota and the vision behind it.
Well, thank you, Libby. I will take this one, and as promised on the chat, I will get in character for the role. Appreciate the question. The vision of Sketches of Minnesota is to use laughter and comedy to celebrate Minnesota communities, promote dialogue within them, and help residents find ways to work constructively across differences. I will let Tane and Brandon speak to the laughter and comedy part, and I know Kevin has thought really deeply about this too. My role is to rely on my extraordinarily funny partners to achieve a few objectives that I consider essential in polarized times and that characterize a lot of our work at MHC. One is to bring residents together for carefully facilitated, but still meaningful and open-ended conversations about their towns, about the social world that they share and that they know together. Second, to reflect their thoughts and feelings back to them in order to help them reflect more deeply on their own experiences and assumptions. And finally, in the process, to make community members feel that together, they can build trust and capacity to build good things together. In other words, to paraphrase Ricky Gervais, to undermine today's dominant expectation that we can't work across deep differences, to use comedy to undermine that expectation. So in short, the aim is to foster understanding within and across communities, celebrate the state's diversity, and encourage folks to take on the difficult work of self-government in good humor. Because the work of self-government has to be their work, the collective work of the governed. And that's why in Sketches, we believe the participants themselves have to have genuine agency in the comedic creative process, which I'll let Tane and Brandon talk more about.
Yeah, thank you, Trig. So hi, Tane Danger. So we should just say kind of how does this Sketches of Minnesota thing work, right? So we go into a community that we're usually invited to be part of, and we have a community gathering there. We have a free meal. We invite as many people as we can. We try and work to have a cross section of the entire community there across all different kinds of lines and boundaries and whatnot. And then we have this open discussion with them. We have some questions and we have facilitators and we have ground rules, but we're trying to get them to talk about what is great about your community. What are some of the things that people get wrong about your community? What are divisions in your community that worry you? And what do you imagine the future of this place is? So all of this is great, and there's organizations that do this kind of work. What makes this project different is that we have this team of improv comedy performers who are there and listening to these discussions, these very real, honest discussions that are happening between community members. And then in that same event, literally as people are wrapping up their conversations, this cast gets up on stage and says, here's what we heard. And they reflect that back to the entire audience through entirely unscripted improv comedy theater. And so you get this really healthy civic discussion, but then you also get people to process what people are talking about through comedy and through a way, as we heard in like several of the other panels, that like lowers the temperature for people, allows people to hear and process things totally differently, allows them to feel like they are seen and being seen. And that we found already like opens up a different kind of like understanding and dialogue like in that space. And then hopefully our hypothesis is out of that too. Brandon, do you want to say anything else about being funny?
Yeah, you know, comedy, we always say that it can be the jabby pokey kind of comedy where, you know, you're needling someone and getting them upset about something, or it can dull edges and kind of make those kind of sharper things more approachable. And, you know, you can talk about them in a different way that we, as the performers, do on stage, that if you were to do it in a regular conversation, people would get heated and angry with each other. But because we're making jokes about it, you know, suddenly this complicated or divisive thing, it's something everybody can engage with. We don't necessarily fix the problem for everybody. That's not our role, but we can have the dialogue in a way that you couldn't before.
Yeah. Really key piece, I really align myself with this quote from Stephen Colbert, where he talks about it is very, very difficult to laugh with someone and be afraid of them at the same time. And I think that that is really at the core of this project, is that if we can get people, as other folks have said in today's webinar, like laughing together, it doesn't mean, as Brandon said, that they're going to agree, but I do think that it lowers the fear that they have literally of like the people who are part of their community.
Beautiful. It's opening so many doors. And to Kevin and Trig, who are with the Minnesota Humanities Center, tell us about the mission of the Humanities Center and why did you get behind this initiative? What are you hoping to accomplish out of it?
Sure. The vision of the Minnesota Humanities Center is to create a just society that's curious, connected, and compassionate. Curious that we come to conversations with open hearts and open minds to authentically listen and hear one another. Connected, as Dr. King reminds us, that we see ourselves tied to a garment of mutual destiny. What impacts one impacts all. And compassion, we need empathy, but that's a noun. We need action, which is compassion. So we can tie all those things together. We're a member of the National Endowment of the Humanities State Affiliates, and within that language, it talks about democracy demands the wisdom of its citizens. And within this space, what I would say is that the wisdom of its citizens comes from the citizens actually listening and talking to one another. And what we have sometimes found is that people have stopped doing that. I would say, as a recovering attorney and someone who has worked in state government, I would say one of the things that we often get wrong within those spaces is that we think that we will only be articulate enough to be able to change someone's mind. What's actually just being able to create stories or create connection. And I will tell you, sometimes sharing a joke with somebody who's on the other side of the political aisle starts the process of being able to find a solution. So that's what we're really hoping to do, is reminding people how important it is to actually listen to their neighbors authentically.
As you all have begun this project and you're working with different comedy troupes and different comedians and actors, what are the most important things that these comedy troupes have to be able to do in the community settings, and how do you think about preparing or training them for that context?
That is a great question. So we put together a cast for this project that we tried to build a cast that was diverse and representative as we could in a team of 7 people of some of the places and communities that we're going to go across the state. And so we really do buy into this notion that like people like seeing people who reflect themselves like on stage, like that representation matters. And more specifically to your question, like what does the training look like for this? I mean, to me, there's like a huge piece of this, which is the training for this is in some ways the training of good improv and good comedy, which is you have to be an incredible listener, right? Like you have to be able to sit down and hear what somebody is saying, frankly, sometimes what they're not saying. If there's more to a story and you want to ask them, like, tell me more about, you mentioned that this was like, it's been a hard few years for town. Like, why? Like, tell me more about that. So you need to be a really good listener. You need to, this is the part that I think artistically is really interesting about this project, and in some ways sets it a little bit apart from even some of the other things that we've heard in today's webinar, which is that we have to reflect back things that we are hearing from a community that may or may not like align with where we are or where like we came in thinking about. We might come into a town and think, oh, this is going to be a conversation all about, I don't know, a rural urban divide. And then you get there and it's like, actually, nobody in that town is really worried about that. They're worried about this totally other thing. And now we have to go and think about how do you bring that to life in an authentic way on stage and reflect that back so those folks hear that. So there is this artistic piece of like, how do you almost channel what people are bringing you? And that requires like a suppleness, I guess I would say. That's a weird word. Suppleness in like how you...
I like it. Don't use moist. Don't.
Well, I was going to, Kevin, and now, anyway, when we have cake at the end of the show, it's more, anyway, it's a great program. And I think that it does require us to really, you know, other people have talked about this power of comedy to be like empathetic as like sort of the first and foremost thing. And, you know, when I teach improv or we practice what we're doing, that's what I say too, is that the first thing that we have to do is be able to try and hear people and hear where they're at and why they're there if we're going to be able to reflect that back on stage.
Can I add that around the moist suppleness of this comedic cake is a firm but pliant shell? We work very hard to prepare the audience, not just to prepare the comedy troupe. So these are really carefully facilitated conversations. There's a lot of framing at the beginning where we make sure that the audience knows exactly why they've been invited here and what they've signed up for. It is not to argue with people and change people's minds. It is to learn from one another and learn with one another. It is not to have their minds changed, but it's also not to come to some consensus on any topic. It's also not to avoid all discomfort. And so we set up ground rules and we post them at every table that they all verbally have to raise their hand and say, you know, yes, Mr. Trigg, we agree to follow these rules. So it's prepping the participants too, and giving them a framework and a set of rules that allows them to participate without wondering if they should be doing something more.
Right, right. You all are doing incredible work. If y'all are in Minnesota or going to take a trip, look up some more of these sketches of Minnesota coming up. And now I will turn it back to Bell President Stephen Olikara for some closing thoughts.
Well, thank you, Libby, and thanks to everyone on that last panel, and thank you to all of our speakers, participants, and supporters who made today possible. This has just been a ton of fun. I've definitely learned a lot. A couple key themes just to reflect back at the end here. We've talked about how comedy can lower fear and create genuine human connection. I love that line that I think Tane shared in the last panel, that to be a great comedian, you have to be a great listener. So these are all great starting points for a conversation as we think about the role of comedy in the entertainment industry to bring Americans together across our lines of difference. And so we're excited to lean into that further with all of you in the months and years ahead. A couple quick shout outs and calls to action. One is for the entertainment community that has joined us. Please see us as a resource on how to flip the script on narratives of division and develop stories that can cut across our lines of difference, which will also expand your audiences. And also, as you see additional allies that we should be in touch with, please connect with us about that. I also know we have a lot of the bridge building and democracy reform community joining us today. We're going to continue to call on you, just as we did a couple months ago around the release of Civil War, as we generated resources to bring to the filmmakers. And we will have more opportunities like that in the future. So please keep in touch with us if you want to continue to engage in this work. And finally, we're going to continue the new American Stories of Us series in a new way later this year. So if you have ideas, we're very open to collaborations for future versions of this event. So with that, I'll just share that laughing helps in many ways, including healing us. And I think that's going to be really important this summer and this fall here in our country. So thank you all for joining us today. That brings us to the conclusion of this program. We hope to stay in touch, and we hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.